Okay, so I figured I'd do a more of a vlog about something I mentioned in one of my past tarot videos about how I got outed at work and how that was a weird experience for me. I've been on the pagan path since I was 17. Kind of like what you call out and proud kind of thing. In my early years, early 20s through about 27, I want to say 27, even leaning more towards 28 and 29, I was very open and vocal about being pagan. It wasn't something I hid. Um, it did cause some issues in my family life with my mother and my father. They were not supportive. They had to go to counseling. There was just a lot of where have I failed in raising this this rebellious child kind of. I found the pagan community in Houston. It's where I met my husband. And we were a big part of the pagan community. I really enjoyed having that kind of community. The drama didn't bother me. I was in my 20s. I kind of liked drama then, so, that was not an issue. And then met a lot of awesome people, got into a partnership with people, and we opened up a bookstore. Little tiny bookstore after the big one closed down. See, I met my husband at a pagan bookstore. That's another story for another day. And so both him and I were pagan, and that was a good thing. My parents did not like it. In fact, it took several years after my parents got over the fact that I was dating a pagan guy with tattoos and long hair and all that kind of thing, and that I was pagan and everything else, and I had a tattoo, and that broke my mother's heart and all that kind of thing. Like several years later, I actually had a hopeful conversation with my parents. We were at a restaurant, and my dad actually turned to me and said, I don't necessarily agree with what you're doing, but, how could all those other people and other religions be wrong? And that was like one of the best things that he'd ever said to me. It made me feel like, okay, there's hope for this. And then my mother passed away. She had cancer and she died. And it really threw my dad for a loop. They'd been together 36 years before she passed on. And it was a hard downhill slide for everybody, just everybody. And my dad was older. He was in his 60s. My mom was in his 60s when she passed. And my dad had never really been alone, had never been without anybody. And they had moved to this town to retire. So this was where they were going to go. And so when she passed, he was in the house that they picked for them to retire at. And he was lonely. And he started going to church. That's where he found his comfort. I do not fault him that at all. I'm glad he found some comfort. But he met a woman there. A woman that is the complete opposite of my mother. Which is not a bad thing, just the opposite. And she did not like anything about me at all. She didn't like the fact that I didn't have my husband's same last name, even though we're married. She didn't like my religion that, of course, my dad told her about, which, again, I don't fault him that. It's just his wife strained mine and my dad's relationship to a point. And we had moved to this small town in Texas when my mother got sick, to take care of him, to be with him, to be around him. But he got married. And her family fit more in with his more comfortable views. So he really didn't, I won't say he wanted us around, but it really wasn't something, when we were around, we made her uncomfortable, which in turn made him uncomfortable, which led to some issues in their relationship. So being in a small town, having that to deal with, the pagan went away. The being who I was went away. So instead of, when somebody asked me something, I wouldn't say, well, I'm a practicing pagan. I would say, well, I was raised Methodist. And everybody seemed okay with that. There weren't any outward appearances of my religious beliefs. It just went away. And being in this small town, a wonderful thing happened. I didn't think I could get pregnant. And I had my 2 children, my 2 boys. And then the fear set in. Being in such a small religious town with my 2 boys, I was terrified that someone would say, well, this witch has these children. We don't think she's a fit parent. So the pagan went away more. The religion went away more. To where all I did was go to work, take care of my kids, take care of my husband to the best of my ability. I did develop a bit of a depression. And there were issues mainly with my new family. I didn't really want them to try to take my kids away from me. So I just, for a good 3 years, just existed. And then my husband got promoted at work. And we moved to another small town. But this one was in Louisiana, about an hour away from my dad. So I was happy with that. I could, while he didn't really want me around, I could still be close if I needed to. And this was a beautiful little town in Louisiana. Where I was from, where I was staying with my dad, was not very pretty. It was flat, industrialized. There wasn't anything pretty to look at. This town is gorgeous. It's still there. I don't know why I'm saying was. It is gorgeous. Has a lot of history. Was in the 2000 and I think it was 11 Guinness Book of World Records for having the most churches. Yay. And again, the fear set in. I'm in Louisiana. What's gonna happen if these people find out that I'm actually not Christian? And the depression stayed for a while, and I became a stay-at-home mom. And it became a time where I needed to go back to work. We needed a second income. And my husband found me this little job at this little record store, which was awesome. Unfortunately, that shut down. And I moved to another job, retail, kind of the one I'm doing now, but where we moved to. And there were some issues, you know. My husband never stopped saying he was pagan, but it was never something that was actually brought up. We did find the local pagan community, met some wonderful people there, but it was a really small pagan community, and some infighting happened, and it just sort of went away. But I did manage to stay in touch with 2 or 3 really wonderful pagans, but it's like herding cats. I mean, their job was very stressful. My job was stressful, and we just never gelled as a cohesive pagan unit like I had in Houston. And again, it was just something, it's just went away. I had school children that I needed to teach. I had a job that I needed to make sure I kept. Just other things. My husband developed some really good friendships. There were some issues with us being pagan that were brought up, like my husband was part of a garage band kind of, and one of the other people in the band told the band leader that he wouldn't be in a band with my husband because my husband was pagan, which was really scary because all these guys were sheriffs. But luckily the band member said, okay, you don't have to be in the band with him, but he's in the band. So I always appreciated my husband's best friend for sticking up for him. And that was really tough because it just, after about, well, I'm 42 now. So after about, 15 years of basically living in fear of somebody finding out I was pagan and, taking my kids away, it got to the point where we realized that the place where we're at is not the best for us. And as much as I hated to do it, we moved away from my father. But I think it's okay. He has his new family to look after him that he's comfortable with. I still talk to him regularly. But we moved up here, and I basically transferred my job. And it was about a month after I started that it was the last day of Hanukkah. I remember this because we were all standing at the counter. This one coworker, I can say his name. His name's John. Like, how many Johns are there? So many Johns. A young girl that's from the same place I was. She is Texan, and she moved up at the same time I did. So we kind of had that, southern fish out of water thing, because we moved up to Michigan to be closer to my brother. We were just standing there, and he said, oh, because the sun was setting. And he was like, oh, it's the last night of Hanukkah. He's like, yay. And she turned around and was like, oh, you're Jewish. And he's like, yeah. And she's like, do you celebrate Christmas too? And he's like, oh, yeah, I celebrate Christmas. And she asked him a couple questions about how he did that. And I was just standing there listening, wasn't offering anything. And I was like, I might have said, that's pretty cool. And she said something, and John turned around and was like, oh, don't ask her anything. She's Wiccan. You can just look at her and tell. Oh my God. It's like the ingrained fear of people finding out, stopped my heart. It literally, I was for 30 seconds terrified. What do I say? How do I react to this? I thought about my kids for 2 seconds, and then I looked and I was like, I've already seen people here with pinnacles. There's people my ages with purple and green hair. I've seen health food stores, and there's a new agey shop in the mall. It's okay. So this all took place in 30 seconds when he did that. And he wasn't being mean about it. He was joking. It was like, she's a witch, I can tell. So I just sort of looked at him after that initial fear and was like, yeah, I know, yeah. And I was like, I admitted it to strangers out in the open. And it felt really good. It was like in that instant, I felt like it was okay to be who I was and who I was supposed to be. So yeah, that's my story about how I became out again in the pagan community.